Yeah, I said it. Grass starter, best starter. Come at me, nerds. Mind you, I know that Bulbasaur and its line aren't the strongest of the starters, but I think it has the better design. One of the charms of Gen 1 is how many of its designs try to affect plausibility. Like, it does feel like you could just walk out of your door and see Rattata hanging out eating from your garbage can. The flip side of that is that Charmander and Squirtle are just a salamander and a turtle, while Bulbasaur is a dinosaur, and to my 10-year-old self, ain't nothing cooler than a dinosaur. Not even a dragon, not even a cannon turtle. Unfortunately, my 10-year-old self also found out that after evolving into the distinctly more badass-looking Ivysaur, the ultimate fate of my cool starter dinosaur was to become Venusaur, which, yeah, seemed like a bit of a downgrade at the time, and for many years after, I switched my favorite to Charmander out of sheer embarrassment. As an adult, though, I appreciate Venusaur. Unlike Blastoise and Charizard, which tries so hard to be cool, Venusaur is content to be stout, flat, and a little bit ugly, and I think we could all use that kind of courage in our lives. Bulbasaur and his line, at least in my opinion, is just the most interesting design among the starters. It's pretty easy to see why Charmander is the most popular Gen 1 starter. It's a fire salamander that turns into a goddamn dragon. And while as a kid, I preferred dinosaurs to dragons, there's a reason Lance is the leader of the Elite Four and not Jimmy the paleontologist. Dinosaurs are cool, but dragons are legendary. And yes, I still think it's that the Charizard got stuck with fire flying. You're telling me a apple is a dragon, but this boy has to Mega Evolve to earn it? Really? Besides that, though, the big design flaw in the Charmander line is Charmeleon. Like a lot of middle stage evolutions, it has the difficult job of bridging the gap from, "Duh, look at the little boy," to, "I am the god of hellfire!" And it doesn't manage it very well. It sort of tries with the angry eyes, bigger claws, and a single horn on the head, but just ends up looking like Shadow the Hedgehog to Charmander's Sonic. I also don't know why it goes so red when Charizard is exactly the same orange as Charmander. Like, it just looks like someone left it in a sauna overnight. I love Charmander, I love Charizard, but Charmeleon just reminds me of how awkward it was to be a teenager. Although Bulbasaur is the best design among the starters, Squirtle is for sure the cutest. Little round body, stubby little arms and legs. Honestly, the only way to improve upon it is with sick-ass shades, this post approved by the Squirtle Squad. There's more than just cuteness to Squirtle, though. That wide grin with the turtle beak dip gives it a certain mischievous energy, and among the starters, it certainly feels like the more rascally of the trio, which is very endearing. Squirtle shares Charmander's problem that its middle evolution, Wartortle, just doesn't look like a natural midpoint on the journey to Blastoise. The major new design element introduced in its evolution is the ears, wings, feathers, whatever they are, and the fountain-like longer tail, none of which carries over in any way into Blastoise. Wartortle, for my money, is way cooler than Charmeleon, but it's honestly a worse design progression. When it comes to Blastoise, by the way, I instinctually want to complain that the water cannons are silly and way too much, but I was 10 years old once upon a time, which means I know that the water cannons are badass. They get a bit much on Mega Blastoise. That design is trying way too hard to be a mecha for me, but then on Gigantom X Blastoise, his entire shell becomes an artillery fortress, and I don't give a damn if that's stupid. That's the tightest shit I've ever seen in my life. Just to be clear, Bulbasaur is still better, though. Caterpie is a caterpillar, and that's sort of it. Gen 1 generally has an aesthetic of design that's more grounded in reality, obviously not completely, but more grounded than later generations. And one of the results of that is that design-wise, Caterpie is a caterpillar, Metapod is a cocoon, and Butterfree is, well, it's a humanized butterfly with little feet and hands and a human-like face construction. And so, the Caterpie line is actually a good case study in how Pokémon handles designing insects, because where real-life insects often have hairs, wiggly feelers, tendrils, bristles, and pedipalp mouthparts, those features can also be kind of off-putting. So Pokémon design tends to smooth insects out and apply a lot of stylization to avoid them becoming real enough to be creepy. And as a person who's creeped out by bugs, I appreciate it. It's hard not to be at least a little charmed by Metapod's dopey eyes, Caterpie's adorable proportions, and Butterfree's anthropomorphization. Enough to forget, for at least a second, that butterflies in real life actually have incredibly creepy mosquito-like faces. I don't recommend that you Google them. The Caterpie line makes bugs appealing, and that's all the reason anyone should need to want Pokémon to be real. Like Caterpie, Weedle uses geometric stylization to avoid representing the features of caterpillars in a way that would be too realistic and off-putting. Where Caterpie hews fairly close to the look of a believable real caterpillar, though, Weedle has a much more anthropomorphic look with its fat little nose and eyes in a humanoid placement. If it's meant to make it look cuter, it doesn't succeed much with me, although the giant stinger on its head does look kind of like an adorable little miniature dunce cap. That anthropomorphization, though, vanishes immediately with Kakuna, whose sharper lines, geometric shapes, and insectoid eyes foreshadow the spiny aggression within. An aggression that goes by the name of Beedrill. Not gonna lie, that early episode of the anime where Ash gets chased around by a flock of these scared the crap out of me as a kid. With adult eyes, Beedrill does look a lot more silly than scary, especially the giant stingers on its arms, although the stingers are really also the only thing distinguishing it from being literally just any wasp. Gen 1 staying close to real animals has its charms, but it isn't always that interesting design-wise. Mega Beedrill has the opposite problem, though, trying very, very hard to be a badass anime wasp and ends up more of a tokusatsu monster of the week than a convincing insect. Pidgey's named for a pigeon, but I feel like it looks more like a fuzzy sort of waxwing or something with a little bit of hawk in there. I have a lot of fondness for this little bird since it and its line consistently turned out to be my strongest fighters back in the day. Pidgey looks small and round, but the fuzz-feathered frills on its body also give it a scrappy quality, well helped by the big talons on its feet. The progression into Pidgeotto and Pidgeot is one of the smoothest visual evolutions in the game, which makes it feel like a natural age progression of a juvenile bird slowly developing and fully coming into its own adult plumage. The feather crest that Pidgeotto spouts adds color and visual interest to an otherwise fairly sedate and earth-toned design, and the final flourish of smoothing out the crest with golden yellow and smoothing the tail feathers for Pidgeot completes the sense of transition. The crest also contributes to a sense of sleekness and speed that Pidgey doesn't have so much. These evolutions aren't super exciting, perhaps the Pidgey line are basic birds after all, but the truly faithful will never forget the gospel of bird Jesus. Anyway, Mega Pidgeot, well, I like the blue accents and the fatter wing feathers, but the crest getting cropped is a straight visual downgrade. Rattata and Raticate try really hard to make rats kinda scary and badass with the emphasized teeth, angry eyes, and use of sharp shapes and spikes in the design, but when you've kept rats as pets for a few years, that's such a foreign characterization because rats are, broadly speaking, extremely soft, round, lazy, adorable little idiots that like to fall off of things. Still, Rattata does a good job of walking that Gen 1 line between being a cool stylized monster and being literally just an animal with its curly tail and oversized teeth and anime eyes. It's not especially exciting, but it's not really supposed to be in the context of the game either. And Alolan Rattata does add some interest with darker colors and a few extra fur spikes, as well as that adorable little mustache. Raticate, meanwhile, is just kind of ugly. The wide open mouth just looks kind of awkward. That's not really how rodent mouths work, and it doesn't really quite square the circle between its angry, scrappy look and its completely round potato body. Alolan Raticate is more successful in that regard, borrowing cheek pouches from hamsters and going all in on being a fat little menacing fur gremlin, and the design feels better in that regard. Seriously though, rats are not scary, they're adorable. Oh look, it's the other Pidgey. Spiro is sort of It tries to be the more aggressive-looking, obviously predatory counterpart to Pidgey's relative sleekness, but its shape language is to me really kind of unclear. All anime spike bush on top and avian smoothness in the body, and its red-brown color scheme doesn't really come together for me. Continuing with the comparison to Pidgey, Spiro has a decidedly more abrupt evolution, turning from a small fuzzy featherball into this unholy combination of a heron, a rooster, and a condor. Between the cracked neck, rooster comb, and beak stuck halfway between a stork and a vulture, Firo has a look that only an NPC trainer could truly love. For all that I think that Firo is quite ugly, though, I do rather like that ugliness. Pidgeot already has avian sleekness down pat, so Firo instead can lean into the awkward and stilted looks that, lots of animals do have, especially birds. Flamingos, shoebills, bald vultures, any eagle when seen from directly from the front, birds can be profoundly goofy creatures, and even if Firo is probably never going to be in my party, I think it's healthy for the design diversity of the game to have something like this as part of the aesthetic. Ekans' name is Snake backwards, and in a spectacular display of nominative determinism that's what it is. It is a snake. It's a rattlesnake specifically, which is colored purple so that it's a poison type, and that's it, really. There is a slightly interesting decision not to give Ekans any visible fangs, perhaps from keeping it looking too scary, but beyond that, it really is another emblematic example of Gen 1's aesthetic approach to keeping its monsters often as close to the animals they're based on as possible. Arbok is much the same story, its name being Cobra backwards, and its design is very much based on an Indian or king cobra, except colored purple so that it's a poison type. Arbok makes the interesting decision to have more human-looking eyes, however, and brings out the teeth and tongue, although there's still no sign of the classic long, curved snake fangs. Basic though Ekans and Arbok are, I do remember that I almost always ended the game with an Arbok in the party back in the day. Snakes are cool. Well, now I'm faced with the problem of trying to sum up Pikachu in a single short. It began life as a hamster-like fat little sparkloaf with a 5% encounter rate in Viridian Forest, which somehow got popular enough with the game's early fan base to earn a place as a central character in the anime, and now it is one of the most heavily merchandised character designs in the history of the planet. And I'm not going to argue with it, Pikachu is stupidly adorable, whether in its original fat potato form or the sleeker and more defined design it has developed over the decades. My analysis is that those design changes more than anything else probably were motivated by the anime. Pikachu needed to be a compelling character with a lot of acting and emoting, and slimming down the neck and giving it a more humanoid body helps with both of those relative to the stocky immobility of its original form. As an incurable and terminal Gen 1 kid, Fat Pikachu will of course always be the true electric mouse of my heart, and thank God that got to be its Gigantom X form, but I'm not so blinded by nostalgia that I can't see that its modern design is superior for its purpose and presents a much more relatable and less animalistic kind of cuteness. I couldn't cover Raichu in the Pikachu video, so it gets its own short. And it does kinda need it, because while in most cases the final evolution of a Pokemon is considered the creature's definitive form, talk about getting overshadowed by your own pre-evolution. Raichu at this point exists not so much as an evolution of Pikachu as it is a cosmetic option with a stat boost. Raichu is also like a lot of evolutions and move away from juvenile cuteness towards some sense of coolness and power, growing longer legs and sharp ears and a lightning bolt tail, which is part of the reason why it never got as popular as Pikachu, I think, but bless them, they tried to move it towards adorableness with its tail surfing a lowland form, where every single hard edge it has gets smoothed into appealing curves, making it look rather like a balloon animal. Still can't beat that Pikachu, though. Speaking of younger cells, Pichu is another attempt to out-cute Pikachu, in this case literally by pulling a Muppet Babies on it, and while it is incredibly adorable, it's not quite as emotive and flexible as its older sibling, and its hyper-distorted look makes it, I think, a little too obviously an anime mascot, where Pikachu has managed to keep more of a sense of being a stylized animal. Hey, sorry to interrupt, I hope you are enjoying the compilation. I'll let you get back to it in just a second. I just need to do a little self-promotion. I need to pay rent and all that. If you enjoy these shorts, you can head on over to the dedicated Shorts channel where I'll be reviewing all of Gen 2 and beyond. If you want to support my work, I have a Patreon and a tip jar linked in the description. And if you have a spare dollar lying around that you don't need and you don't mind me having it, I would very much appreciate the help. A single dollar of direct support is equal to literally thousands of views on a video. So if there is a content creator out there that you like, whether that's me or someone else, consider helping them out with whatever you can, whenever you can. Times are tough right now though, so do take care of yourself first. Anyway, I also have a Twitch channel and a Let's Play channel, and I'll probably be playing Scarlet and Violet on those once they come out, so hey, consider following those too. Anyway, back to the Pokemon. Sandshrew continues the Gen 1 tendency of simply copy-pasting animals into the game with a very literal translation of an armadillo, albeit it does make what I think is a pretty interesting choice to replace armor plating with a literal brick pattern in the skin, which not only communicates the same idea of sturdiness, but arguably associates it better with its ground type, while giving it a nice little design twist. Much later down the line, that brick pattern is then used by a lowland Sandshrew to turn its look into an igloo made of ice bricks, which is just very clever recontextualization. Sandslash, meanwhile, in both its forms, is more of a chimera, taking the base form of an armadillo and adding in the quills of a hedgehog or porcupine. Combined with the massively lengthened claws, Sandslash and Sandshrew make a compelling demonstration of basic shape language. Sandshrew, which is all round and smooth, looks defensive and relatively harmless, while Sandslash, with its many spikes and edges, looks aggressive, sharp, and dangerous. The Nidoran line was the first introduction of sexual dimorphism to Pokemon, and also of Pokemon gender, and this concept is attached to an interesting line because Nidoran are poison rodents and not directly copied from any animal found in nature. Female Nidoran, with their light blue color, rounded spikes, shorter ears, and softer shape language, draw from the most basic tropes of sexual dimorphism possible, looking softer and gentler and less aggressive than their male counterparts. They never look harmless, mind you. Nidorina and Nidoqueen both look plenty capable of tearing you a new one, but the gender tropes that inform their designs are very human in origin. Visible perhaps most obviously in Nidoqueen, whose body markings quite literally outline a pair of breasts on her chest, with the bottom markings completing a sort of two-piece bikini shape. Personally, I find it more interesting if they had drawn from sexual dimorphisms present in animals, rather than just copy-pasting human versions onto the creatures, but oh well. Interestingly, as Nidoran evolve, they change from being based on rodents to being, well, essentially dinosaurs, and that change is handled really well, making a smooth and well-rounded design progression. As we discussed in the female Nidoran video, the Nidoran line relies on some very tropey and often very human sexual dimorphism for its variety, which is a bit tedious, but given that Nidoran was the only line to do this at all for like 3 generations, okay fine, didn't want to reinvent the wheel there, I guess. Male Nidoran stand apart from their female counterparts, first of all by being bright purple, which is how you know they're a poison type. Besides that, they're also just sharper. They have more spikes, they have longer spikes, their heads are more angular, their claws are pointier. Overall, they come off as more dangerous and aggressive than the female Nidorina, which, again, is all very baby's first sexual dimorphism character design, honestly. The transition through Nidorino into Nidoking, though, is relatively smooth, bridging the gap between small poison rodent and giant rhino dinosaur fairly smoothly, and where Nidoqueen got titties and bikini markings, Nidoking goes a little bit more subtle, merely receiving fully human-like pectorals, which is kind of funny. All my criticisms aside, though, both Nidoran final forms look like cool-ass kaiju, and that does count for something. If you know Pokemon trivia, you probably know that once upon the olden times, Clefairy was slated to act as the official mascot for the Pokemon franchise before it got brutally force-stocked by Pikachu on Final Destination. That mascot intent does come through in the character design, which seems tailor-made to be turned into plushies. It is rounded and cutesy and humanoid, and it is one of the Gen 1 designs that have no real-world animal analogs whatsoever. If Clefairy is anything, it is, yes, a fairy, implied in the first generation to be literally alien Pokemon from the moon, which is honestly an amazing concept. Looking down the line, Cleffa and Clefable don't really bring much new to the table of design here. Cleffa is Clefairy, but SMOL small, and Clefable is Clefairy, but it's been stretched out a bit and has weird fleshy wing appendages. The line is certainly adorable, but being so completely designed to be a mascot just prevents them from being interesting to me. And yes, I know about the theory that Gengar is Clefable's shadow, everyone knows that theory, and I think personally that it's more of just a design coincidence. Welcome to Did You Know Gaming, and did you know that Vulpix and Ninetales from the Pokémon franchise are based on the legendary Japanese kitsune or nine-tailed fox? We've mentioned often that Gen 1 is fond of merely copy-pasting animals into the games, making its cast more animals than monsters, and Vulpix and Ninetales buck that trend a little bit by drawing on mythology and folklore, while still also clearly just being normal-ass foxes with more tails than is usual. Their Alolan forms substitute their separated tails and manes, which in their base form could sort of be construed to look like stylized flames, for large consolidated shapes that look on Alolan Vulpix like little snowdrifts, and on Ninetales like a billowing frosty mist. It's a very clever way to recontextualize the design to the opposite type, albeit I would argue that the Vulpix line wasn't exactly that heavily fire-themed to begin with. This is also a case where I would say that the Alolan regional form is just straight up superior to the original. Frosty Mist Ice Kitsune is a way cleverer and more interesting concept than just literally a normal kitsune. Oh hey look, it's Clefairy again! Jigglypuff feels very much like a retread of the exact same ideas that animated Clefairy, mixed with a bit of, oh hey, what if it was also a balloon, I guess. Definitely not Kirby over here even shares Clefairy's 3-stage evolution line and evolves using the same item, making it extremely hard not to draw comparisons. Of the two, I'd say Jigglypuff is more appealing, while Clefairy is probably a more interesting design, given that with its round body, Jigglypuff is essentially an emoji on legs. Wigglytuff, interestingly, develops essentially rapid-like features with its long ears and lengthened body shape and long feet, which while it doesn't take it out of mascot design territory, does make it more interesting by making Jigglypuff more terrestrial as opposed to Clefairy sticking hard to looking like a moon fairy fallen to Earth. And this does mean that in their final forms, they seem more like sibling Pokemon than mere riffs on one another, which is an improvement. Anyway, for my money, Jigglypuff is cuter than Clefairy, but Clefable is a way better design than Wigglytuff, and Cleffa is the superior baby Pokemon because Igglybuff just looks like it consumes the souls of orphans to live. This Pokemon will never not give me traumatic flashbacks to the first time I tried to get through Mount Moon in Pokemon Blue. But unlike your Rattatas and your Pidgeys, which are basically animals copy-pasted into the game, Zubat earns the title of monster because it is quite literally a flying mouth with fangs and ears. Bats, contrary to popular belief, are not blind, and out of 1,400 bat species, there's literally only 3 of them that actually feed on blood. But Zubat embodies the idea of bats, the image of bats in collective consciousness, and it does so honestly really well. As for Golbat, honestly, its battle cry might as well be, "I want to suck your blood," for all that it looks like the silliest cartoon Count Dracula bat you have ever seen in your life. It is a fundamentally ridiculous Pokemon to the point where it's a little bit too much for my taste. So thank God for Crobat, which does the interesting move of pulling back on the ridiculousness a little bit and returning the line to a sense of animal plausibility, looking substantially cuter first of all, but also looking like there might be some room for internal organs in its body, which I think is a substantial improvement. I do love me a good Crobat. Oh, Oddish. I don't think Game Freak quite understood what they were doing when they named you a weed Pokemon. Oddish is to grass Pokemon as Pidgey is to flying-type Pokemon, probably the simplest, most literal execution of the idea possible. It's a clump of grass on legs with a cute little kawaii face. Simplicity is not a sin, though, and Oddish is adorable, which makes it even more hilarious when you catch one thinking it's cute, and then it evolves into Gloom. Talk about puberty hitting you hard, yeesh. Where Oddish's design emphasizes that it's a grass type, Gloom emphasizes that it is poison, leaning into a bit of gross-out sliminess with its drooling, and slowly developing its Rafflesia flower crown that comes into full bloom with Vileplume. Rafflesia, in case you don't know, is known as the corpse flower because it smells like decomposing flesh in order to attract flies, which is delightful. And Vileplume really is just a Rafflesia on legs. There's not a lot to say about it, but there is another final evolution option in Bellossom, which for my money just doesn't feel like it belongs in this line at all. It's a cool design swerve for the line, but it feels like a Pokemon that was designed to evolve from something else and just got stuck on here at the last minute as an apology to anyone who was disappointed that Oddish didn't have a cute evolution. For many of us, Parasect was the first time we learned how f***ed up and dark Pokemon can be if you overthink it. As Paras, it's a cutesy little cicada nymph slash hermit crab creature with some adorable mushrooms growing on it, but upon evolution, its eyes turn milky white and the fungus overtakes the entire body, rendering it little more than a set of mindless zombie legs for the mushroom invader. It's based on the life cycle of the parasitic cordyceps fungus, Parasite, you see the pun there, which famously mind controls ants while eating them alive from the inside, which is not only evidence that there is no god and we are alone in an amoral universe, but also a surprisingly f***ed up concept to stick in a game based entirely on having fun adventures with your adorable animal pals. Hey kids, catch a Paras and you'll get to watch your friend slowly lose its sentience and die right in front of your eyes. Rated E for everyone! All of that went completely over my head as a kid, of course, so it's not like it's actually traumatizing, and as an adult, I think this concept and execution is actually really cool, and one of the most interesting ideas in the original 151 monsters. I do like Paras. Okay, so Caterpie was clearly originally supposed to evolve into Venomoth, and Venonat was definitely supposed to become Butterfree. It has Butterfree's eyes, mouth, feet, hands, antenna, and color scheme, and I have to imagine it was just one of those weird game dev decisions at some point during Gen 1 to swap them around for whatever reason. Maybe you can justify it by saying that in real life, moths and butterflies often look like completely different species from the caterpillars that spawn them, but yeah. Regardless, Venonat is probably the cutest Gen 1 bug Pokemon, adopting the blob with big eyes design convention that power Pokemon like Jigglypuff, giving it a cheerfully optimistic optimistic look with just a little bit of creepy tension generated by its fangs and compound eyes. Venomoth, on the other hand, is kinda boring. It's fairly monochrome and understated, and besides being vaguely purple-ish, it doesn't do much to communicate its graceful poison moth idea. It even loses the cuteness appeal of Venonat, making the evolution feel vaguely like a downgrade. Has anyone done a ROM hack putting the proper evolutions back together? I'd like to play that. Okay, so Diglett, it's half an oval with eyes, and then it evolves, and then it's 3 half ovals with eyes, and they're coming out of the ground, and that's it? We've noted before that a valid criticism of Gen 1 designs is that they stick a little bit too close to real animals, but Diglett bucks that trend by looking less like a mole and more like a whack-a-mole, which is fun, in a way, I suppose, but it is otherwise so devoid of features to discuss that outside of hilarious theories about what the body looks like under the surface, discussing it is just really kind of boring. Alolan Duck Trio helps things a little bit by turning into 3 clones of Patrick Swayze from Point Break, which is hilarious, but also just makes them a bit of a joke character design. To be fair though, what else are you gonna do with a frickin' Diglett? Meowth, that's right, really doesn't look that much like a cat when you really take a look at it. The slit eyes and ears and arguably the paws are doing a lot of the heavy lifting there, and the design doesn't really get there in my opinion. Meowth looks almost less like a cat than Garfield does, but it's also not really based on a cat as such. It's based on the beckoning cat, the Maneki Neko from Japanese folklore, who's connected with wealth, hence the coin on his forehead, and good luck. So it's more of a yokai, I think, than an actual animal. At least until it evolves into Persian, which just straight up looks like a puma, or Alolan Persian, which looks like, well, Garfield again. Alolan Persian is interesting, though, in that it's based off human-made cat breeds and their weird anatomy, tying into the Alolan region's general theme of exploring the human impact on the animals around us. Gigantom X Meowth, which is straight up a long cat meme, interestingly looks more cat-like than the base form, since its proportions are perversely more cat-like when elongated. So yeah, Meowth is a nice little Pokemon design, but not that great of a cat design. And I think we'll leave Galerian Meowth till we get to Berserker. If you don't love Psyduck, we can't be friends. Part platypus, part bath time rubber ducky, and 100% an exact expression of what I feel like every moment of my waking existence, it's hard not to love, or at least pity, this miserable little blob. Psyduck is designed with lots of rounded, soft, curvy lines, giving it a simplistic design that should be just cute, but the 1,000-yard stare of suffering in its pinprick eyes lend an uncomfortable tension to the design that I really enjoy. Honestly, I think this Pokemon gets a bit more boring when it evolves. Golduck is just Dragon Ball Donald Duck, all spikes and claws and sharp lines. It's a design that's kind of trying a little bit too hard to be cool, and to be fair, it does manage to get there. It just loses so much of the useless suffering potato appeal of its first stage that it doesn't really feel like an evolution of Psyduck so much as it feels like Psyduck's cool self-insert original character Do Not Steal. If not for the stat boost, I would never evolve it. Mankey is a deeply bizarre Gen 1 chimera. It has the paws of Meowth, the body of Venonat, the nose of a pig, and bird talon feet, and yet it manages to somehow, against all odds, to still kinda look like a monkey. I struggle to explain why, because it really shouldn't. It's just one of those small miracles of character design. Maybe it's the tail. That said, Mankey sucks. Like, I'm really not a fan. It's a design without a strong concept, I think, and visually, it just feels clunky and unbalanced. Primeape is perhaps a little bit better, but its weird fused boxing glove hands just look like the artist had trouble drawing fingers, and it loses whatever special magic that made Mankey somehow still look like a monkey, and just becomes an angry, spiky hairball that looks like nothing, really. I really don't think these designs communicate anything interesting, especially given what later generations were able to do with monkey character designs. Growlithe is a very good boy, and I love him, and I appreciate him, and I only want what's best for him. It's one of my favorite Gen 1 Pokemon because, yeah, adorable puppy that can cast Flamethrower, but as a design, it does suffer from some clunkiness. Both Growlithe and Arcanine's designs have that Gen 1 spikes equal fur aesthetic, and that modern-era Sonic feeling that their bodies are less cohesive biological units and more assembled from discrete plastic parts. Growlithe's muzzle, for example, kind of looks glued onto its head, and Arcanine looks like it's wearing its mane and face fur like a complicated sort of balaclava over its head. For all of that, though, I still love them. I can't exactly rate them highly as designs. Arcanine is more of a lion than a dog, if I'm honest, but god damn it, if I can get them into my party, I will replace any other fire type to make room for them. It's the intro of the anime, man. 8-year-old me saw Ash running with a giant fire dog one time, and that was it for me. The chains of nostalgia are chains that bind. Poliwag is an adorable little tadpole boy who I appreciate, and there's a really clever idea in representing the fact that tadpoles' intestines can sometimes be seen through their skin with a hypnotic spiral that then becomes the justification for its ability to use hypnosis moves. I love it. That is very clever. Its evolutionary line, though, sucks. Poliwhirl and Poliwrath are the same character design, like they're just the same exact character, except one of them is angry and went to the gym, so that kind of sucks. But also, a tadpole should evolve into a frog, I think. Whirl and Wrath sort of gesture at that with the cartoon frog eyes kinda, but no, that's not nearly frog enough for me. Thank God then for Politoed, which seems to me to be Game Freak having that exact same realization in Gen 2 and going, okay, let's fix it in post. And Politoed, for its part, is the perfect adorable frog boy conclusion to Poliwag's line. It retains just enough spiral imagery to create a solid through line with the pre-evolutions, and although the switch in color scheme is a bit unmotivated, I'm happy to declare Poliwrath dead and fully obsolete. All hail the Hypnotoad. I've never quite gotten over my resentment that Alakazam is trait evolution only. Abra is a curious design. It looks vaguely like a Japanese fox, but mixed with a sort of insectoid segmented body and a long fat tail that looks lizard-like to me. This continues into Kadabra, who adds sagely mustache and a spoon to make reference to the fake psychic trick of spoon bending. The tail also gets really fat, which again reads lizard to me, and the claws get more aggressive and pronounced. And then, with Alakazam, the tail just disappears, which I'm not sure why that is, but it makes the creature more anthropomorphic, more human-like, and its ears become horns instead, along with that extended edition of the mustache. Perhaps it's all to evoke the image of a human magician. Mega Alakazam certainly takes that idea and runs with it, and between the sudden giant beard and the robe-like sleeves, it leans fully into the implications of magic inherent in its name. The line feels a bit unfocused though, and relies on a sense of bizarreness to communicate its spooky power, which is fine, but not the best communication of psychic power even within Gen 1. I've never really been sure how to understand the Machop line's design. Machop is maybe reptilian, like a cute, punchy little martial arts dinosaur? That seems to be borne out by Machoke, which explicitly becomes reptilian and gets these, I don't know what they are, the lines on its arms, gills. But then Machamp looks like a buff King Dedede from Kirby, and he's supposed to be a penguin, so is Machamp's mouth a beak? I mean, I guess birds are dinosaurs. Honestly, Machop and his line are probably just supposed to be not human, which is important because they are mostly human. They have human anatomy across the board. Machoke even has human toes. Ugh. And in a move that raises far too many uncomfortable questions, Machoke and Machamp wear clothes, which implies that, well, best not to think about what it implies. These Pokemon are wrestlers, basically, hence the championship belt, the buff physique, and Machamp's extra arms. And from that perspective, I suppose Machop is an enthusiastic kid hitting the gym and taking his vitamins to be just like his wrestling idols. Aw, that's kinda cute. The Bellsprout line is kind of hilarious because you start with this adorable skinny wriggly boy and then screaming flying banana! And then finally a normal pitcher plant, but with eyes. It maintains cohesive design elements throughout the line, the bulb shape, the rim around the mouth, and the leaves, which makes it nominally identifiable as continuous evolution, I guess, but where Bellsprout and Victreebel do kind of look like actual plants, Weepinbell looks like a Cubert enemy. Its giant staring eyes are just hilariously bizarre as a middle stage between its other forms. That said, I really kind of like the idea of a pitcher plant as a Pokemon. Victreebel looks genuinely kind of sinister, and the idea of a carnivorous plant that can actively hunt you is a great idea for a monster. It's been done many times before, and it works here. Design-wise, it doesn't take anything more than giving it eyes and a couple of sharp fangs to impart it with a sense of distressingly predatory intelligence. Bellsprout is adorable and Victreebel is scary, but Weepinbell remains a bit of a joke. Pokemon needs way more jellyfish monsters. They are some of the most creatively incredibly diverse creatures on Earth, and the fact that Tentacool and Frillish so far are it in the franchise is a huge oversight in my opinion. Anyway, part box jellyfish, part Portuguese man of war, and part spooky alien, Tentacools are the Subats of the sea, i.e. an annoyingly common Pokemon that can be useful if you put time into it, but after 600 surfing encounters, you just don't want to see it anymore. The big red orbs are the lion's flashy feature, giving them a sort of otherworldly alien look that makes them a bit unsettling. And while they're clearly still jellyfish, they're maybe not quite jellyfish from Earth. Tentacruel leans even harder into this alien aesthetic, especially with a strange two-pronged claw now growing out of its body, mixing in a bit of the vibe of a squid's beak, and when this chimera approach to character design works, that's when some of Pokemon's best design tends to happen. I don't think I've ever wanted them in my party, but this is just a pair of really well-designed little monsters. Pokemon are real. Geodude is real and strong, and he is my friend. And yeah, not much to say about Geodude otherwise. It's a rock with arms and eyes, and more or less so is Graveler. Golem gets a bit interesting, pulling in some tortoise elements and suggesting the rock as a shell, which is cool, although in general that design feels like kind of a big departure from the rest of the line. Alolan Geodude is more interesting though, being a rock-electric type, and justifying this idea by implying with its design essentially that the body is riddled with piezoelectric crystals and magnetic minerals, which is a really cool idea. Alolan Golem takes this maybe a little bit too far, growing mad scientist facial hair and running around with what looks like a rocky railgun on its back. Still, I would much rather analyze designs that go too far than ones that don't have the stones to go far enough, and the use of the black rocky accents ties the Alolan Geodude line together much better visually than the standard one, and it feels a lot more cohesive. What if horse but on fire? It's a simple concept, but it's a strong one, and turning the mane of a horse into flames is not necessarily the most original idea, but it is very cool. Rapidash to me has always been one of the straight-up coolest Gen 1 designs for that reason, although I have to admit that the unicorn horn has always felt more incidental and random than interesting on that particular Pokemon. Enter the Galerian line, which goes full My Little Pony on us, replacing the flaming mane with multicolored candy floss that says trans rights, and especially on Rapidash, the horn here becomes a central design element, the only harsh and dangerous bit of aggression on an otherwise fluffy little pony. It's beautiful, but clearly not to be f***ed around with, lest you find out. In either regional form though, the Ponyta line is never really original, and it doesn't do much to remix its horse base model, but it's really well executed and always cool to look at, and that is more than enough, surely. Man, how popular is Slowpoke that it gets to have 7 forms? Its base form seems to be based on some odd mix of an otter and a salamander, which is interesting, and with Slowbro it establishes the visual joke that becomes the basis for the rest of its many varieties, i.e., it got bitten by a Shelter and haha it didn't notice because it's slow-witted. And there's a testament to the creative power of iteration there, because from that one joke we get Tailbite Shelter, Arm Cannon Shelter, Iron Man Armor Shelter, Crown Shelter, and Poison Brain Parasite Shelter, all simple iterations on the same idea. Although, let's be honest, none of these things look like Shelter, like even a little bit. Shelters are oysters. These are clearly snail shells, and it bothers me. Despite that, though, I can't help but love these oblivious dumbass Pokemon. They look clueless in a really charming way, and while I don't know that I would call the designs well-formed as such, they all have kind of that Gen 1 and Gen 2 assembled from plastic parts look going on, they are a great demonstration of the power of simplicity, because whatever else it is, Slowpoke is also iconic. Magnemite is a funny little thing. It's essentially a toddler's drawing of a robot with its inexplicable functionless screws and randomly attached magnets, but give one up for the amazing power of googly eyes, because with its giant pinprick pupil eyeball in the middle of its head, it gains instant personality and sentience, which is kind of adorable or kind of creepy depending on how you look at it. Magneton is just 3 Magnemites stuck together, because magnetism, you see, which is an effective way to communicate the increased power of evolution, but not at all an interesting one. Perhaps realizing this, Magnezone was introduced in Gen 4, leaning into the idea of tractor beams and magnetism by turning the assembly into a literal flying saucer UFO, complete with a 1950s-style bulb antenna coming out of its head. It's kitsch and a bit silly, but it's balanced out by the red and staring giant eye of death that now dominates its face. Like, it does look like it would incinerate you with a laser beam and feel no remorse. Magnemite is one of those Gen 1 designs that I have nostalgia for, but I can't quite explain why because I've never used it in my teams. The human brain is weird. Farfetched is ostensibly a reference to a Japanese saying, "A duck comes bearing green onions," i.e. a duck arrives with exactly the ingredients you would need to cook it into a duck stew, which is ironic and convenient. Farfetch'd never really read as a duck to me, though the bill is too long and sharp, and as a kid I didn't know about Japanese proverbs, so I just thought, oh, the duck is using the green thing like a sword, the same way that I use a stick. And even knowing the origin, that's still what it looks like to me. Game Freak seems to have thought along the same lines, because when it finally got the Sirfetch'd evolution, that's exactly where the design went, and Sirfetch'd charmingly looks goofy and self-confident in equal measure, which is the perfect encapsulation of the childish fantasy of the stick sword. The clever visual flair of Farfetch'd, though, isn't really the leak, but the little marking on the forehead that acts as eyebrows. It's not a lot, but it does give it a sort of cartoon protagonist vibes, which is, again, perfect for the my stick is a sword fantasy. Galerian Farfetch, by the way, is the exact same thing, except instead of being a kid with a stick for a sword, it's an edgy teenager who has watched anime with a stick for a sword. Doduo is one of those odd designs that is simultaneously based on several real animals and also definitely not based on any of them. It contains the vibes of ostriches, emus, dodos, and, at least to me, especially kiwis, but just the fact that it has 2 heads for some reason makes it all its own thing. The black pearl eyes makes it adorable and rather precious, although Game Freak needs to explain how the hell this thing and its evolution can learn fly. And speaking of the evolution, Dodrio does the typical evolution thing and jettisons cuteness for coolness and edginess, adding black feathers to the plumage and sharpening up the beak. But it's also one of those Pokemon that is secretly terrifying if you read the Pokedex, because apparently the 3rd head emerges when one of Doduo's heads literally splits itself in 2 to form an entirely new consciousness. And goddammit, Game Freak, this is how we get creepypastas. Stop scaring the children! Doduo's line is ultimately more weird than interesting to me, but that penchant for left-field weirdness is part of what makes Pokemon designs fun to talk about. Seal is one of those Gen 1 take a normal animal and put a weird feature on them designs, with its horn, and I guess arguably the tusks, being just about the only thing distinguishing it from a cartoon seal. It's cute, and the tail being shaped like a stylized fountain or a whale's blowhole exhaust is a lovely little ocean-themed feature, but there's just not a lot to say about it. Dugong is a little more interesting, adopting the fabric-like flippers and tail of essentially a goldfish, which I guess is something, but yeah, no, again, it's literally just a seal with tusks and a horn. Pokemon's Gen 1 designs are often at their best when they take a normal animal and somehow make them magical, but they're often at their worst when they take a normal animal and fail to make them magical. Seal just doesn't have anything special to recommend it beyond being cute, but, well, I guess being realistic, cute is often enough. I have a soft spot for Grimer, but I don't really know why. I guess its sort of dopey cheerfulness is charming, but it's not exactly like cuddly, it's slime, and when it turns into muck, any sense of cuteness is quickly obviated as the creature becomes ever more goopy and sludge-like, and loses much of the humanoid definition that it had in its pre-evolved form. Designing a Pokemon to look amorphous is actually deceptively difficult, because no matter how amorphous it is, it still has to be recognizable as itself. Grimer and Muck accomplish this, in part with the banding around their bodies, which not only adds to the sense of constantly depositing sludge rolling off of their forms, but also gives them a highly recognizable texture to be identified by. The Alolan forms, seemingly taking inspiration from the rainbow reflections of oil slicks, bring in bands of supersaturated color to look even more toxic. And Alolan Muck apparently picks up rubble or plastic waste that becomes like rows of teeth or horns, making it look even fiercer than its normal form. It maybe oversaturates itself with the details a little bit, but it does work to make it look even more dangerous and fierce. Aw, Shelter's kind of adorable, isn't it? It does the Gen 1 thing of having big round eyes with pinprick pupils, which gives it a sort of permanent look of shock and surprise, but isn't that tongue such a creative way to represent a clam in its foot? Oh, by the way, clams have feet and they can walk with them, and it looks really weird. Shelter works in that super simple Gen 1 way of just taking an animal and making it a little bit weird and human looking, and so does Cloyster. I'm not making the joke about Cloyster, I'm not saying it, I just did it need... Game Freak, did you need to put the spike in the... Did you need to have... It just kind of... People were always going to make the joke, but it kind of seems like you're inviting it when you put the spike, like... Oh, never mind. Anyway, it's pretty clever that its face from the Shelter form now becomes a black pearl inside the shell. It's such a simple transformation, but it works so well. Although, as a kid, because of the face, I always thought it looked like a Ghastly or a Gengar had gotten stuck in there. Ghastly's character design almost makes Kirby look overcomplicated. It's a circle with big eyes and fangs, which does give it a rather personable, mischievous energy. Haunter sort of loses that a little bit. I think it just looks stereotypically evil, but has there ever been a more charming little rascal of a scamp than Gengar? I think not. Look at this perfect round lad. I have never gotten over my bitterness that it's a trade-exclusive evolution. For what it's worth, I like the theory that Gengar is, or was meant to be, the shadow of a Clefable. Clefable is innocently adorable in a way which is somehow the perfect opposite of Gengar's prankster gremlin energy. And I do like how this evolutionary line has a clear development, going from barely more than a floating face and some gas to slowly emerging into a spiky shape language, and then a merging of the two, a round face from Ghastly with the spikes and hands of Haunter forming Gengar. It's like the Pokemon is slowly learning to manifest itself more and more as it completely evolves. It's good stuff. Do you think Game Freak knew the world of innuendo they were stepping into when they termed a Pokemon the Rock Snake? I hope not. Anyway, when I was a kid, I used to just assume that Onix was so strong because, well, it just seemed like it was supposed to be from the anime. In reality, not so much. And I gotta say, I don't really feel this design, if I'm honest. The idea of a snake made out of boulders is cool, but something about the penguin face they settle for just doesn't really gel for me. It looks really weirdly awkward. The same goes for the shark fin on its head. That's theoretically a really cool visual idea, but it just looks kind of awkward in practice. Steelix does a few things better in that regard. The head is more streamlined, it's got those fancy fins giving its body a better sense of definition, although it does become maybe a little bit too top-heavy with that giant head. And again, even though it's definitely better, it still looks a little awkward. I appreciate its sprite in Pokemon Black and White, though. Look at that little boy wiggle. Tapirs are some of the best animals on Earth because they're the kind of animal that if you've never seen one, you assume that people are just making it up if they describe it to you. Drowsy then combines that with the myth of the Baku, a dream-eating chimeric creature from Japanese mythology that itself might in fact have been inspired by tapirs, at least in part originally. Like a lot of Gen 1 Pokemon, the complexity of Drowsy's design is limited by the low amount of detail you can render in a 56 by 56 sprite, and so its design is maybe a little bit too simple for the concept. All the detail is concentrated in the face leaving the body just some round shapes with a color boundary on it. I really wish there was a little bit more to it. And it's the same story with Hypno, which seems to take after a proboscis monkey, maybe? All the detail goes to the face and the collar and the little pendulum, leaving the rest of it just a generic, entirely humanoid-shaped body. For how high concept it is, based on a chimeric folklore creature, the design is ultimately a little bit undercooked, I think. Krabby is a crab. Subscribe to this channel for more reactions and hot takes. No, okay, but like, Krabby is a simple Pokemon, but there is a great working example here of how Pokemon's brand of stylization works. To wit, crabs typically have eyes on stalks, which are a little bit alien and weird, so we replace them with humanoid eyeballs with pupils. Crabs have weird pedipalp mouth parts, so we smooth those out and instead imply a mouth with a separation line between the upper and lower shell, and give it a couple of belligerent fangs to add a little personality. With Kingler being the more powerful evolution, we just ramp up the intensity of all of that. The jutting fangs become bigger, and we introduce some asymmetry with the giant superpowered claw, as well as a little crown of shell extrusions to match the name. For the Gigantom X form, same procedure, ramp up the size by turning it into a giant spider crab, and play even further into the monarchy imagery with a big imperious bubble beard, and boom, there you have a weird arthropod turned into an appealing little Pokemon. Every RPG needs to have mimics, and here's the one for Pokemon. Voltorb and Electrode are about as simple as character design gets. They're literally just circles with faces on them. They're basically emoji, if emoji could explode, and take out your favorite Nuzlocke Pokemon in the process like an... They are obviously based on the basic color scheme of a Pokeball, because mimic, and I guess they're electric type because Pokeballs are tech. That would explain why the Legends Arceus Hisuian version is grass type, because those Pokeballs are made of seeds. And I do appreciate that the Hisuians have this lovely wood grain texture on them, as well as shapes that seem to be carved into them rather than extruding from them. On the base form, it is a weird disconnect that it has like a plastic shape language, but then very organic looking eyes and eyebrows just like coming out of that. One fun little detail is that Voltorb looks angry and Electrode looks chipper and happy, and they have faces on opposite colored sides. Get it? Because one side is positively charged and the other side is negative? That is a fun, if slightly corny little science joke. Execute is eggs? Or maybe it's seeds? I'm pretty sure it's eggs, but it's definitely some kind of ovum. And much like with Voltorb, I mean, what are you supposed to say about this? It's a bunch of circles with eyes on them. It's an emoji squad. I do appreciate that the faces seem to have a range of personalities-ish, even if it's only really expressed through, you know, expressions. Executor is another story, though. This Pokemon is an absolute delight. It's based on a palm tree, although the few lines around its rotund body don't necessarily do the best job of communicating this, but there is something just so delightfully charming about these dopey faces waddling around on those stubby little legs with the palm leaves coming out of its head, acting like a spectacularly silly haircut. But good as it is, it gets better, because Alolan Executor is just the peak of character design. I'm sorry, nothing is better than this. Nothing is better than this goofy-ass, dumb-looking, absolute perfect himbo of a character design. Literally, the only thing that could make it better is if it was somehow a dragon, which it is. If not for Execute dragging it down, it would be perfect. You know, Cubone is a really f***ed up Pokemon. Here you have a creature whose entire existence as a species is apparently predicated on 1. Seeing its mother die right in front of it, 2. Wearing that mother's skull as a helmet and using her bones as weapons, and 3. Having enough complex emotional consciousness to feel grief about it. It's an entire species predicated on and made out of deep-seated parental trauma. Like, I'm glad I didn't fully understand this when I was a kid, because it would have messed me up. But the bones are, ironically, the meat of the design here. The body is a sort of generic cutesy cartoon dinosaur, and so the helmet and club become the major iconic and recognizable elements. This is equally true for Marowak, although in its case, it's a white skull face that becomes the striking part of the design, and it is really striking. Alolan Marowak being a ghostly fire dancer, on the other hand, is a little bit of a weird swerve. I don't know, I've never really felt like that idea works with the concept of the line, honestly. The Hitmonline is a weird one. Chan and Lee used to be separate Pokemon, but then became divergent evolutions of Tyrogue, which can also evolve into Hitmontop. Tyrogue looks nothing like Hitmonlee, barely like Hitmonchan, and Hitmontop looks like a completely separate species from all of them. It might be one of the most designed incoherent lines in the entire franchise, unified only by a common theme of martial arts. Hitmonchan on its own is cute, though. The whole line only has a male gender, but there's a feminine aesthetic to Hitmonchan, which, hey, a bit of gender is always fun. Its shoulder pads are probably meant to emphasize its arms and punching power, just as Hitmonlee's corrugated legs are supposed to emphasize its legs and kicking, which, yeah, sure, although I note with confusion that Hitmonlee actually has notably more muscle definition on its arms than Chan. Tyrogue seems to be kind of a wrestler, except it's incredibly skinny, which, yeah, I don't know. At least its head bridges give it a little bit of design coherency with Hitmonchan, and his 3 fingers with Hitmonlee, which I guess that's something. Hitmontop is, I mean, it's cool, it is based in Capoeira, and I guess the head spike makes sense for a spinning top, but yeah. Look, I don't know what to say. I don't think these should all have been connected as evolutions. I just don't think it works. The Ultra Moon Pokedex says that Lickitung licks filth clean with its tongue. Whatever it licks always stinks afterwards, so whether it's really clean is questionable. While a lot of its other entries say that if you're licked by this thing and you don't wash it, you will have an itchy rash basically forever. So file that away with reasons to never read the Pokedex, because ew! Lickitung is a Pokemon whose whole design is really in the name. This Pokemon is about the tongue and the rest of the body is merely a thing for the tongue to be attached to. It seems to be based on some sort of salamander, which makes visual sense at least. It's one of those Gen 1 designs that seems to have been intended fully as a curious one-off, but which had an evolution appended later to make them more, I guess, competitively viable. Enter Licky, whose tongue can stretch up to 82 feet and whose saliva can dissolve anything it touches. Seriously, the Pokedex is just non-stop nightmare fuel with these guys. Its design is on its own a little bit more interesting, though. It seems patterned after the idea of, like, a gourmet with its little bib-like markings on the chest and fancy dainty hairdo, although honestly, like Lickitung, it still feels more like a gimmick design than anything really substantial. Still, that is part of the charm of early Pokemon weirdness. Coughing is a fart. I'm sorry, but it is. If you wanted to create a fursona for a fart, this is what you would design. It even has an expression on its face like it's taking perverse delight in tormenting people with its stench. It is the Pokemon version of a Dutch oven. Like, I'm sure it's meant to be an embodiment of smog or pollution or whatever, but it just looks so smug. Wheezing, then, is just more farts. Like, it's an even worse fart that comes with an extra smaller fart attached as a bonus, but at least it has the good grace not to seem so pleased with itself. As a design, they're almost painfully simple orbs with nubbins and faces, so there's not much to say about them until Galerian Wheezing enters the picture, a design which I unironically love so much. Galerian Wheezing is bizarro English industrialization, being an old-timey capitalist who inhales pollution and expels clean air. The cloudy facial hair adds a ton of charming character to them, and the giant literal stovepipe chimney hats are just funny. They're just funny. This is a funny Pokemon. I really like it. I really like Rhyhorn. Maybe it's just the memory of struggling to beat Giovanni's Rhyhorn on my sister's Game Boy in 1998, but it's always been in my head as one of the cool, strong ones. And its design does support that, especially the Gen 1 sprite. It looks like a battle tank of a beastie. It is a rhino covered in stone, and visually, honestly, one of the more complex Gen 1 Pokemon with all those overlapping plates and shapes. It works really well. Rhydon, meanwhile, was apparently the first Pokemon ever designed, and it's markedly simpler and more stylized, transforming into a sort of rhino kaiju arrangement. Because of that, it ends up looking disappointingly similar to Nidoking and Nidoqueen, especially losing a lot of its identity. And perhaps that's why Rhyperior looks like that. Here, they're trying to lean into the idea of a drill, burrowing, mining, essentially giving it a sort of rocky, bulletproof vest or bomb suit-looking arrangement of slates. It also becomes noticeably more squat and rotund, with weird arms and a wrecking ball tail. Honestly, it's just way too much for me. Rhyperior has that final evolution problem of trying way too hard and it doesn't pull it off. If not for the stat boost, I'd never evolve Rhyhorn if I'm honest. Chansey, to me, fits along with Lickitung in that category of Gen 1 Pokemon that feel like they were meant to be curious one-offs and oddities, and weren't really meant so much to have evolutions. Chansey is the egg Pokemon, and it is shaped like an egg, and has an egg in a pouch, and it looks vaguely like if an axolotl got inflated with a bicycle pump by Daffy Duck in some Looney Tunes short. It's a cutesy and weird Pokemon that kind of didn't need Blissey as an evolution. Blissey's design gets rid of the axolotl theming, replacing it with, I guess, angel theming. It's sort of cherubic with its feather skirt and little wing bits and cloud-like haircut, which I guess that goes well enough with its position as a nurturing healer Pokemon. Happiny, the baby form, is simultaneously appropriate in its extreme cutesiness, like, yeah, Chansey is the sort of Pokemon that would have a baby form, but also the most baby of all baby Pokemon, looking like it's literally wearing diapers. Oddly, its evolutions feel both appropriate to the line and really unnecessary. I've never found this Pokemon especially appealing or interesting. Man, Tangle is just great, isn't it? It's a little waddly boy who's all covered in vines and stuff, and he's got his little tiny gipply soot sprite face in there. He just goes around doing, I don't know, grass boy stuff. It is hard to know whether to see it as an embodiment of a tumbleweed or a kelp knot or a grassy bush. Personally, I think it looks too fleshy to be a tumbleweed, but who knows? What matters is that he's just an adorable boy. Just a little guy, just a tiny little fella. Look at this boy. Who then turns into a 6-foot-tall swamp monster that probably drowns people. Tangrowth is a really solid design evolution, honestly, because it does retain a lot of that I'm just a little guy vibe from Tangela, albeit taking on what has always looked to me like aspects of Tove Janssen's design aesthetic, you know, from the Moomins. It's a bit like an unholy mixture of the Groke and the Hattie Fatteners, with perhaps some Swamp Thing thrown in there for good measure. It's the sort of design that's kind of innocuous and cute under full light, but tell me you wouldn't yourself dry if you ran into this guy in a dark forest in the middle of the night. You can't, it's terrifying. Kangaskhan, the Pokemon that seeks to answer the age-old question, what if a kangaroo was also a dinosaur? And to be fair, it does answer that question quite well. This is definitely a kangaroo, which is also a dinosaur, and a pretty cool-looking one, all things considered. On the downside, it has the exact same body plan as Nidoking, Nidoqueen, and Rhydon, like down to the 3 claws on each foot and the relative proportions of the head, body, limbs, and tail, which, you know, you can be a little more creative with your monsters there, Game Freak, but that's not really Kangaskhan's fault, ultimately. There are some fun fan theories about how cute Cubones are Kangaskhan cubs that lose their mothers, which I don't quite believe, but it is a little weird that Kangaskhan of all Pokemon never got a baby evolution, right? I mean, it's literally right there in the pouch, come on. Speaking of which, by the way, a cool thing about Kangaskhan is that it has a Mega Evolution that changes literally nothing about it. Instead, it causes its cub to rapidly grow up and jump out of the pouch to help, which is both extremely fun and extremely cute. I quite love it. Horsea has just a really smooth evolution line. It begins all soft and rounded, gets all pointy and spiky, and then smooths out into a perfect mix of the previous two forms imbued with a sleek deadliness that makes it look genuinely a bit intimidating, which is a big deal for a frickin' seahorse. Which is the other aspect of Horsea, that it is literally just a cartoon seahorse, and Seadra is literally just an angry cartoon seahorse. It's the classic normal animal plus minimal changes equals Pokemon formula, which of course works, but is rarely exciting. Kingdra, interestingly, is not designed after a seahorse, technically, but is Sea Dragon, which is a related species. They're the ones who do that cool thing of mimicking seaweed for camouflage, which Kingdra homages with its horns and fins shaped into vegetation or coral-ish shapes. And I guess that's why it's a dragon type too, literal sea dragon. Neat. My strongest feeling about this line, though, is the suffering and anger of losing Nuzlocke Pokemon to its goddamn sniper ability. What unhinged madman at Game Freak thought that triple damage criticals was an okay thing to do? So, Goldeen and Seaking, huh? Those sure are goldfish. We've talked before about how Gen 1 Pokemon often take the form of normal-ass animals with like one fantastical feature slapped onto them to justify the monster part of the game title, and Goldeen and Seaking are prime examples, because with them, it's literally just the horn. Like, that's it, we slap the horn on them, and uncomfortably human-looking lips also. If you're curious, Goldeen is based on the Tosakin goldfish, a breed developed in feudal Japan originally, and interestingly was nearly wiped out by US bombing campaigns in World War II and a subsequent earthquake which threatened breeding populations. Seaking is probably an Azumanishiki goldfish, which is a particular breed of the painted Oranda, and yes, I did have to look all this up on Wikipedia. And I suppose you could make an argument that these extremely manipulated human-bred species are a kind of monster. They certainly aren't natural, in air quotes. Goldfish have been subject to selective breeding for 1,000 years and have become invasive species in the places that we bring them to. They are, in that way I suppose, as unnatural as Mewtwo. Not as cool though. Are my tastes in Pokemon irreversibly biased by watching the first season of the anime as a kid? Absolutely, because I love Staryu and Starmie, and I'm like 90% sure it's because Misty had them in the anime and they did like one cool move one time that impressed me as a child. As a design though, yeah, I mean it is just a starfish. Or, well, sort of. Yeah, it's a star-shaped water type, but between the gem in the middle, the highly geometric design, and the general lack of organic feeling about it, I don't know. It kind of feels like the design is a lot more about the star than the fish here. Like, especially Starmie, with the multiple overlapping star shapes, feels like it's supposed to mimic the twinkly arms of a star in the sky. And when you see it standing on two legs with two arms out to the side and one pointing upward like a head, I mean, it does kind of look a bit like an alien from some kid's cartoon, doesn't it? Like a starman waiting in the sky who'd like to come and meet us, but who thinks he'll blow our minds. But, nah, it's gotta just be a starfish, right? Oh god, Mr. Mime is so creepy. And I really don't think he's supposed to be, but clowns are creepy, mimes are creepy, things which look human but aren't are creepy, and Mr. Mime is all three of those. His artwork and animation generally work really hard to paint him as a harmless, silly mime, but there's nothing they can do. It's a creepy Pokemon, it always will be, and it always has been. Mime Jr., on the other hand, is kind of cute. Still a little creepy, but it does look adorable and fun enough to overcome the clown creepiness factor. Galerian Mr. Mime takes another tack, removing a lot of the clown-like aspects to look more like a sort of old-timey vaudeville performer almost, with a black and white suit and crystal necktie and big shoes. And this comes to a pretty amazing head in Mr. Rhyme, which is literally just Charlie Chaplin's tramp character as a Pokemon. And Mr. Rhyme is almost fun and adorable. Until you see the giant nose and staring eyes on his midriff. A face where a face should not be, a horror of horrors that his mustachioed head is merely a harmless lure to draw you close so that the true mouth may consume you. Scyther is one of the coolest, most badass Pokemon in the entire franchise, and I will not be taking questions or criticism. Admittedly, probably a big reason why I think so is that I first saw it when I was 10 years old, and kids do be impressionable. To be fair though, it is a half-dinosaur, half-praying mantis with wings and sword arms, so 10-year-old me is forgiven for being seduced at first sight. Looking at it through the depressing lens of adulthood, yeah, Scyther is maybe a little bit of a confused design. It relies pretty heavily on the geometry plus segmentation equals bug design trope rather than really use the shape language of insects in its design like other Pokemon do, and the dinosaur/lizard elements of it are a bit perfunctory. Still, nostalgia binds me, and that might be why I see Scyther and Cleaver as downgrades. Scyther actually has better insectoid shape language and is definitely the better formed design, much more coherent, even if Mega Scyther just looks silly with those unwieldy claw arms. And Cleaver is by far more interesting than Scyther, being a cool mix of hard rock and an insect body plan, although I think the design is way too busy with spikes and accents and would benefit from some simplification. Despite all that, I still like Scyther the best, and I probably always will. Jinx. Okay, so first of all, Game Freak didn't intend it, but it looks like a racist caricature of a black person. It looks like a dressed-up gollywog doll, and I'm gonna leave some links discussing that issue in the description because there isn't time to discuss them with nuance in a 60-second short. Not that skipping over the controversy is gonna help Jinx very much, because with a Gen 1 Pokédex noting that it seductively wiggles its hips as it walks, and later entries saying that it speaks a human-sounding, incomprehensible language, Jinx, with its squat humanoid design and the big titty bustier it wears, is possibly the only Gen 1 design creepier than Mr. Mime. Like, it's really hard to see this thing as an animal or a monster. It is very explicitly designed to look human. And yeah, Jinx may in fact be based on Japanese mountain hags and witches and gyaro fashion trends, making it a mythological spirit creature, but still, like Mr. Mime, it just feels like a weird fit for the franchise. It is too human. Smoochum, the baby form, looks vaguely like a baby bird, and the lack of clothes and articulated human hands gives it some comforting distance from humanity that takes it out of the uncanny valley. But still, the Jinx line to me is one of the best arguments for just retiring catastrophically outdated Pokemon from the franchise entirely. Electabuzz, as best I can tell, is an electricity-themed hybrid between a tiger and a Japanese Oni. And like Magmar, Lickitung, Jinx, Porygon, and Mr. Mime, it seems to me to be one of those Pokemon that were never really designed to have evolutions, but rather meant to exist as curious one-offs to add diversity to the roster, and for that purpose, yeah, Electabuzz is a decent design. But it becomes the awkward middle child when we introduce its later evolutions, Elekid and Electivire. Elekid is literally an electric plug, and an adorable one at that, with its gregarious little face and stubby body, and Electivire is an electric mix of a gorilla and the abominable snowman, with tentacle tails? Beyond that, though, it complements Elekid because on its back, what should there be but an outlet that matches Elekid's head, which is a solid bit of design-theme continuity that doesn't interact at all with Electabuzz, which feels very separate from their themes. There's an attempt at continuity with a Testacoil-esque bulb antenna on Electabuzz and Electivire, but it remains painfully obvious that these ideas were conceived separately and put together with a little bit of electric tape. Magmar is a genuinely bizarre little chimera, a bird beak on a humanoid body with, I guess, lizard limbs and a tail? Its arms look oddly fuzzy, it has a spiny ridge down its back like a dinosaur, and its enormous overhanging brow ridge is on fire. Bulbapedia says it might be inspired by the Karura, which is a fire-breathing bird out of Indian mythology, which, I mean, I guess that's cool. As it stands, Magmar, in all its oddness, is a striking creature. It's yet another one of those Gen 1 single-stage designs that feel very much made to be a unique oddity to add flavor to the Pokédex, but then, like many of the other one-stage Pokemon, it got saddled with 2 more evolution stages. Magby is mostly just cute with its Birdo-like look. It's a perfectly decent baby Pokemon, but Magmortar was a mistake. Or, well, okay, maybe not. Magmar's whole thing is being bizarre to stand out, and Magmortar sure does do that, looking like a cross between a rejected Mega Man boss and a horny Easter egg. I don't like the look of it at all. I think it's hideous, but, I mean, I can't say it's not eye-catching, I guess. I don't remember this boss from Hollow Knight. Pinsir is cool, though. I've talked before about how the formula of a lot of Pokemon designs kind of boils down to normal animal plus one fantastical feature equals pocket monster, and while Pinsir is very obviously based on a stag beetle, its design takes a slightly more abstract route, incorporating the visual shape of mandibles into its horns. It's a simple thing, but that, plus its humanoid body configuration and f***up-looking mouth, makes it feel much more like a monster inspired by animals than an animal which is merely called a monster like a lot of Pokemon are. Mega Pinsir, its only evolution, does the typical Mega Evolution thing of being kinda way too much. The elaborately adorned wings, spikier horns, and extra arm spikes and those completely deranged looking eyes makes it look mostly like a low-rent tokusatsu villain or a rubber suit kaiju from one of the cheaper Godzilla imitations. At least I think so. And to be fair, Mega Evolutions are supposed to look that way, but I think Pinsir's design is a lot stronger when it's simpler. Normal animal plus one fantastical feature equals pocket monster. We've talked about this formula before, and Taurus is an amazing example of the principle in action, because this is literally just a bull with 3 tails and some forehead gems. Arguably, you could say it is a chimeric creature mixing attributes of a cattle bull with a bison, or I guess a water buffalo, but whatever the case, it is hard to argue that Taurus looks particularly fantastical. This is a cow. And yet, I mean, with Gen 1 designs, I always kind of have to check my nostalgia a little bit because this was my generation growing up, and the rose-tinted glasses are strong. But even so, there is something striking about this design. Like, those 3 tails, thin as strings, and tufted with fur are so bizarrely delicate compared to the rest of the creature. There is something a little bit magical about the design as a whole, especially with the forehead gems, which are a classic symbol of a magical creature. I won't argue that Taurus is spectacular, but I do think it's good. Subscribe to this channel for shorts, or see my main channel for longer in-depth videos. Magikarp was supposed to become Dragonite, Dratini was supposed to become Gyarados, and you cannot change my mind. Magikarp is based on a Chinese legend called the Dragon's Gate, which is a mythical gate atop a mythical waterfall, up which swims ambitious carps trying to make it to the top. Should a carp manage to swim all the way up and jump over the gate, the legend goes that it would be transformed into a powerful dragon. So, Magikarp is clunky, dumb-looking, and extremely weak unless you spend a lot of time training it to be strong enough to jump the gate, as it were, at which point it becomes a powerful dragon. And look, yes, absolutely, Gyarados looks far more like a Chinese dragon than Dragonite does, but not only does Magikarp's colors match Dragonite, it has the two fins that become its wings and its mustache tendrils that become Dragonite's antennae, like they're literally the same shape. And Dratini, oh, let's talk about Dratini, because not only does it have the same body plan and colors as Gyarados in its first stage, it even has the exact same head fins that Gyarados gains in its final form. The idea that Dratini should evolve into Dragonair, which then becomes Dragonite, is just a nonsensical evolution line. Dratini and Dragonair both already share design elements with Chinese dragons, and Gyarados is the perfect capstone to that aesthetic. Subscribe to this channel for shorts, or see my main channel for longer in-depth videos. It shouldn't be possible not to love Lapras. It's a combination dinosaur and sea turtle which will ferry you across the sea while singing to you. The appeal of a lot of Pokemon has a tendency to be bombastic. This Pokemon is the most powerful, that one is the most stylish, this one tramples, that one slices, this one dices, and that one electrocutes. Lapras, on the other hand, offers a different but equally powerful and important appeal. This isn't the imaginary monster friend who takes you on epic adventures to defeat the most powerful of foes. This is the imaginary monster friend who sails you to faraway and beautiful places, who comforts and protects you in stormy seas, and always gets you back home safe. Think Falcor from the Neverending Story, or indeed the Iron Giant. That's what Lapras is. And its design is genuinely fantastic. It's a combination Plesiosaurus and Sea Turtle with a bit of Placodont in there, rendered out in graceful proportion with a bit of modeling and shell bumps to give it a mature and grown-up look. The Gigantom X form is all of that, taken up in intensity with more musical theming, but without really changing that much, because why fix what ain't broke? Yes, I have a Gen 1 bias, but I think Lapras is perfect. I'm just a gigolo, and everywhere I go, people know the part I'm playing. I'm paid for every dance, I'm selling each romance. Ooh, what they're saying. Now there may come a day when youth will pass away. Oh, what would they say about me when the end comes? I know I was just a gigolo. Life goes on without me. Oh, poor Ditto. Once upon a time, it was supposed to be a fun gimmick Pokemon whose silly and indistinct character design created rich opportunities for comedy in the anime, but then Game Freak introduced breeding to the franchise and the life of these creatures would never be the same again. And there isn't a lot to say about Ditto's design beyond that. That's why I sang the song. It's an indistinct slime blob that can be shaped into any other Pokemon you want, in more ways than one. Yeah, the Eevee review is gonna have to be in parts, and I suppose we'll start with the OG, the source of all these beasties. Eevee has graduated from being a very mildly obscure free Pokemon with an evolution gimmick in Gen 1 to being essentially a co-mascot for the whole franchise, and when you look at the design, it is understandable. It's essentially an unholy hybrid of a cat, a dog, and a fox, with a big fluffy snuggly fur collar, and while it's a bit on the generic anime cute mascot side, well, it does have the major advantage that if you don't love its base design, you have like 8 other options to swap it into. In that sense, it really is the counterpart of Pikachu, who's often treated as though it simply doesn't have an evolution at all. If I'm quite honest, I'm not that charmed by Eevee itself. Like I said, it's a very generic, cute anime mascot. If anything, I like its Gigantom X form better, because it identifies that the giant fur collar and the big fluffy tail are its most appealing features, and pumps them up to a degree that falls just short of cartoonishly silly, but which to me makes it much more appealing as an adorable creature companion. Alright, it's time to talk about Vaporeon, so you all have to promise to be very good boys and girls and NBs down in the comments, okay? Don't make me get the spray bottle. Design-wise, Vaporeon is maybe a little bit much. It's like, we need a water-type version of Eevee, so we'll give it fins on its head, and a webbed collar, and a dolphin tail, and a fishy ridge down its back, and there's an extent to which maybe, like, once it has the dolphin tail and the fish fin ears, maybe we get it, maybe you don't need to keep adding more stuff to it. But on the other hand, I do think there's a charm to over-designing, and the Eevee line is kind of built for that. Eevee itself is very basic, but every evolution appended onto it can go extra hard at being like the most monotype Pokemon it can possibly be. You will not be one moment in doubt about what type of Pokemon Vaporeon is when you look at it, which, honestly, that's a good thing, and it's the main reason why people like Vaporeon. Definitely the main reason. In contrast to how people like Vaporeon Maybe a little bit too much. I feel like Jolteon just doesn't get a lot of love among the evolutions. And, well, yeah, it will never match Pikachu for cuteness, and it is afflicted by a certain amount of Gen 1 jank, where in order to make it look electric, they just made it angular and gave it really erratic spiky fur, which just isn't quite as appealing. Jolteon ends up looking more scrappy and rough than cute or sleek, and you can compare and contrast that with how they would later design Pokemon like Ampharos or Boltund. I do also think that Jolteon looks a little weird without a tail. Like, it does look a little bit like it's been cropped, and because the ears are so big, to me it just ends up looking slightly lopsided. I think Jolteon does deserve more love, but I also have to admit that it would never be my first choice for an evolution, and I would almost never pick this over, well, basically any other electric type. Sorry. Flareon is a lot like what if you took Vulpix and Growlithe and threw them in a blender and made a Pokemon out of whatever sludge came out of that. It's definitely the cuddliest of the Gen 1 evolutions with that big fluffy collar and tail and pompadour, but it's also a bit on the boring side for the line, honestly. It's like, it's orange with some fur accents that mimic the shape of flames, that's cool, but compared to how extra like Vaporeon is in its design theming, or later additions like Espeon or Leafeon, the type theme does feel a little on the conservative side. I wouldn't have minded, for example, if the pompadour was a literal flickering flame, or if it left burn marks under its paws where it walks, or if it was illuminated by an inner glow, or something. But I'm nitpicking. Flareon is fine, and it is in fact the evolution I used to always choose in Gen 1. And there is something to be said for a design that's just a big, warm, fluffy cuddle pillow. It's for sure the Gen 1 evolution that I personally would most like to hug. Gen 2 is when the evolutions start to get interesting. And where the Gen 1 evolutions definitely lean more into the canine aspect of Eevee's design, Espeon goes hard on the feline aesthetic with its long purple tail and slender body. It looks almost like a hairless Sphinx cat. The purple coloration, which in Pokemon is usually more associated with ghost and poison types, here does the job of helping Espeon look alien and eerie. The gem on its forehead brings to mind the idea of a third eye, the split tail is a trait probably borrowed from Japanese yokai, and the somewhat uncanny impression is rounded out both by the huge glowing eyes in a completely spherical head and the odd shape of the ears with their long tufts of fur beneath them. Imagine encountering this in a forest in the middle of the night. You might think you'd seen a creature from space. Espeon is easily the weirdest evolution, and it uses that weirdness to excellent effect. You take one look at this creature and you believe it has psychic powers. I'll be honest, I don't really know about Umbreon. It's a dark type, so its fur is black, and then that is contrasted with red eyes and bright yellow bands around the fur, and I mean, okay, I guess. I've always kind of felt that the yellow color bands aren't really there to do anything for the design so much as they're there because it needed some kind of color contrast and they couldn't think of anything better. Like, if the Pokemon was just a flat, unbroken black, yeah, that would be too boring. It wouldn't really look like a Pokemon, it would look like a badly drawn Labrador, but the circles and color bands just feel random and unmotivated to me. It doesn't evoke dark type, it looks like a kid doodled all over it with a magic marker. The tail and ears are also kind of an odd choice, sharp and pointy in a way that gives the whole design a sort of prickliness, which, again, I'm not really sure what that's supposed to do. Is that a trait you associate with darkness or shadows? Because to me, the shape of shadows is fuzzy and indistinct and mysterious, but Umbreon is nothing but crystal clear high definition, and it doesn't look that great in it, frankly. Leafeon might be the only evolution that works harder than Vaporeon at being the most monotype it can be. Sometimes Pokemon designs only really gesture at their typing with color, like there'll be a fire Pokemon which only has a bit of red in its design and that's it. Hello, Litten. And then in other cases, they say, subtlety be damned, and throw the whole entire plate at the wall. That's what they're doing with Leafeon, and I really like it. Those ears with their frayed plant fiber edges and the crinkly tail like a leaf that started to dry and crumble, that's good. And yeah, maybe it gets a little bit much with the tufts of fur shaped like flower petals and leaves, but it's all kind of brought back down to earth, literally, by the rest of the color scheme. Cream and brown, calm, sensible earth tones that keep the design from running away from itself, as it were. I don't know that I would say that Leafeon is the most compelling evolution design, but it feels very complete in its concept, and honestly, not every Pokemon design can say that. Glaceon is an interesting one. The ice typing is done quite well here, using the repeated visual motif of a diamond shape to invoke both the crystal structure of ice as well as the sleek smoothness we often associate with it. So the ears are diamond shapes, the tail is a diamond shape, the tufts of hair are diamond shaped, the bangs are distended diamond shapes, and it's got diamond shaped markings along the back. Pair that with a cold temperature color scheme and, well, there you go. Now, for my money, I do kind of think it would have worked better if there were some actual ice on the Pokemon, like what if the ends of the hair tufts were ice crystals, literal frosted tips, or something like that. Between the ears and the hair, the design does end up a little bit top-heavy, but without those tufts in silhouette, you could mistake Glaceon for Umbreon. I think the imbalance there is intentional, basically calling extra visual attention to the hair as the main notable feature of the character design to ensure that it becomes this form's most iconic feature. And it works. Okay, number 1, Sylveon is trans. We can't have a debate about this, it's just true. Beyond that, it also manages to be the absolutely most extra of all of the evolutions. The ribbons and bows and extra detailing around the ears creates a design which is frankly very detail-heavy, and teeters right on the edge of maybe being a little bit too much, but the soft pastel color scheme smooths it all out a little bit, and those giant sky blue eyes framed by the almost Mickey Mouse-like brow ridge of pink fur do a good job of creating a strong central attachment point from which all of the ribbons can flow. I feel like maybe the tail could have benefited from either copying and reinforcing the floaty shape language of the ribbons or else be cropped a little bit closer so as to open up the back of the design a bit more. Like I said, Sylveon is like right on the edge of being too much, but it's also really pretty, which is of course the point. This is the elaborate over-adorned corsage of Pokemon designs, tap dancing on the fine line between cute and kitsch and managing it essentially perfectly. With Porygon, the name of the game is abstraction. Ostensibly, it was created when Satoshi Tajiri was told that sprite-based games were over and he should make 3D polygonal-based games instead. It is in that sense a kind of games industry meta-joke, a sprite of a polygonal 3D model in a 2D game. And Porygon is almost unparsable as a form. It might be a bird of some kind, a paper crane has been suggested, but its blocky polygonal shapes and trippy colors makes it impossible to identify. Porygon 2 clarifies it a little bit, looking sort of plastic and duck-like. It's all smoothed out, literally evolving into a higher polygon count, but it's still abstracted, alien from any real animal. Where other Pokemon often try very hard to look like animals, Porygon actively seems to try not to, honestly. And it all comes to a head in Porygon Z, which abstracts down into downright surrealism, becoming essentially the Picasso version of something that already looked bizarre. It's a modernist art sculpture of a 2D sprite of a 3D polygon from a 1996 pixel-based handheld game. And I love that. There's nothing else like Porygon. All praise the Helix fossil, it's Ammonite. And it's a great example of the classic Pokemon design formula. Normal animal plus one fantastical feature equals pocket monster. In this case, the fantastical feature is the giant humanoid eyes, which lends Omanite a certain mascotty cutesy charm. Its shell becomes essentially an enormous hat that it's wearing as it postures around with its little legs, and it's all quite cute. Until we hit Omastar, a design that not only gives it slit-eye pupils and tentacles, but which also feels the need to remind us all what squid and octopus mouths actually look like. If Omastar didn't retain the cutesy squashed proportions of its pre-evolved form, this creature would be absolutely horrifying. And just in case the design changes were too subtle, Omastar even has a ridge of aggressive spikes running down its shell now, as if to say, do you get it? Do you get it? This version is the more dangerous one. Praise Helix, obviously, but this is one of those Pokemon that I would just hand an Eviolite to and then spam B at every level up. Oh boy, do I have mixed feelings about Kabuto. On the one hand, I do love horseshoe crabs and trilobites, they're cool little creatures, and there is something delightfully unhinged about giving a cute little black button eyes on top of the shell and staring red murder eyes underneath it. On the other hand, the heavily enforced simplicity of the especially Gen 1 first evolution stages really does hinder it. Part of the charm of trilobites and horseshoe crabs is their mix of complexity and simplicity. Especially trilobites had really interesting segmented shell patterns, and horseshoe crabs have those long spiny tails, and Kabuto just doesn't have those points of interest. And its evolution is literally just Scyther. Like, while the idea that Scyther might be descended from Kabuto is cool, that's a fan theory at best, and also, the best they could come up with for the evolution of a trilobite Pokemon is a bipedal humanoid? Really? There's like a billion cool prehistoric sea creatures to pull from, and you just do Scyther again? Oh, and in case you think I'm being too harsh with this comparison, the shiny form of Kabutops is literally green. Aerodactyl really doesn't look much like a rock type, does it? Like, you can sort of accept that idea for Omanite and Kabuto because they're both creatures with shells, but Aerodactyl just looks like, well, a pterodactyl. Except it kind of doesn't really, does it? If anything, it looks more draconic or like a wyvern. Especially that spear-tipped tail, to me, recalls dragons more than anything prehistoric. And I think here that it's Gen 1's this needs to work as a Game Boy sprite design limitation that's probably forcing those decisions. The huge protruding jaw and the bat-like wings are the key features of this design, and the rest just kind of has to be crammed in where space is available. But if Aerodactyl fails to integrate any rock-like aesthetics to its design, Mega Aerodactyl is, if anything, a little bit too eager to let you know, I'm a rock type! I'm a rock type! Do you see all my rocks? I have so many rocks! I'm a rock type! And as we've talked about before, Mega Evolutions are kind of supposed to be a little bit too much, but I can't help but think that a dialed-down version of the Mega would actually be a substantially better design for the base form. Huh. Snorlax is a big round soft boy who likes to eat and sleep in inconvenient places, and oh my god, he's just like me for real. Interestingly, his design is actually based on real-life actual person and Game Freak employee Koji Nishino, which, first of all, I see it, and second of all, that's absolutely delightful. But the rabbit hole of trivia goes one level deeper because Nishino's love of food got him nicknamed Kirby at the Game Freak office, and the Japanese name for Snorlax is Kabigon. Kirby. So it's a reference both to a real-life actual person and to another Nintendo character. Damn! As a design, Snorlax is classic Gen 1 simplicity. It's 4 big circles and 3 colors with an absolute minimum of detailing, which is an approach that either yields absolute iconic designs like Pikachu or unmemorable nothings. I think Snorlax is in the former category. It's a remix of a big cuddly teddy bear with just enough special details like the mouth and the pointy ears to make it special and its own thing. And the Gigantom X form, where Snorlax has grown so big and slept so long that a whole ass forest and mountains have sprung up on its belly, is absolute peak character design, the perfect degree of taking a joke to an absurd and hilarious conclusion. The legendary birds are some of the more complex designs in Gen 1, and with their Galerian forms, they now make a great case study in how Pokemon character design has changed over the years. Articuno, for example, is one of only 5 Ice-type Pokemon in Gen 1, and its design needed to communicate its type and concept within the space of a 56x56 Game Boy sprite. So, we have that big diamond head crest, stubby blunt wings like flat ice crystals, and a big flowing tail, and besides that, everything else about it is essentially just a normal bird. Galerian Articuno, on the other hand, has all the polygons you could possibly want to play around with, so we get these swishy, curvy, overlapping wings, a lot of concentrated detail in the face with the crest and the eye mask and the beak all crammed into one space, and some body markings on it with that black belly. It's all way more elaborate and more able to pile the details on. And while as a Gen 1 kid, I do have some nostalgia for Articuno, in the light of hindsight, it never really looked the part of legendary. Ah, Zapdos, you sure are a design. Gen 1 sprites couldn't use color on screen, and so the character designs of most of the Pokemon had to get the typing of the monster across in another way. So, much like Jolteon before it, Zapdos indicates that it is electric type by essentially just being spiky. Just spikes. Spikes on the head, spikes on the wings, spikes on the tail, the beak is a spike, the eye is a spiky shape. Then fair enough, it did get the point across back then, but Zapdos just looks dumb now. It looks completely flat, the design has no depth to it, and it only very incidentally even looks like a bird. Galarian Zapdos kinda seems to recognize this. It's still spiky, but they now all have a unified directionality, which gives it a much more streamlined feel. The flatness is addressed by giving it way more overlapping shapes, and as a fighting type, the design now emphasizes its big, powerful legs in what is essentially an ostrich form. It gives the design a much better balance between the spikes and organic shapes, and generally just looks way better. Gen 1 form is still silly though. Moltres is the only Gen 1 legendary bird that actually manages to look legendary, I think. Gen 1 enforced a lot of simplicity with its technical limitations, and Moltres has the benefit that billowing fire is relatively easy to render, even in a 56x56 grayscale sprite. Its base design is some sort of stork or heron, but as I've said before, the early franchise formula really was normal animal plus one fantastical feature equals Pokemon a lot of the time, and the simple addition of billowing plumes of fire instead of plumes of feathers basically does the trick of making it look magical. Galarian Moltres actually kind of misses the mark for me a little bit, dark type as it now is, by holding on to the flame motif. Like, I get that it's supposed to be evil fire and represent, like, spiritual burnout or whatever, but still, yeah, this design still just says fire to me. And given how much the other legendary birds changed in Galar, it's a little bit weak sauce that Moltres basically just got stuck with a palette swap. Seriously, it would just make more sense to have Dratini turn into Gyarados. Ah, never mind. Dratini is a cutesy little thing, barely more than a noodle with big eyes and a round muzzle. Its design relies very heavily on the fish fin ears and a little forehead gem to make it look special, and even that doesn't make it any more than just a cute noodle. Dragonair pushes all of this very naturally to a more interesting place. Its body is now long enough to slither in interesting curves, and it has a slender elegance to it with more orbs, wing ears, and a horn to drive home the mythological creature vibe. It generally just looks much more fantastical. And then there's Dragonite, which looks frankly all like any of the other forms, at least at a glance. What it does look like is a cute, friendly, cuddly, extremely appealing, typical dragon. In fairness, the S-shaped body and the general face shape is pretty similar to Dragonair, but it is a big swerve from that sleek serpentine elegance to this big teddy bear, and I'm not really sure that that works from a design perspective. Regardless, yeah, I was absolutely desperate to have a Dragonite on my team as a kid, and I still love them. They're just so cute. Miu and Mewtwo are both partly based on the shape of an embryo, but where in Mew it's used to make the critter cute, in Mewtwo it's used to make it alien. Between the grey and purple color palette, the bizarre tube structure coming out of the back of its head, the bulbous fingers and toes, and that oddly hardened chest piece, it's just an odd-looking creature. The hardness of the chest and horns and head are contrasted against the soft-looking, smooth and fleshy tail, creating an extremely striking design which I might be biased by 2 decades of nostalgia, but I still think it's pretty damn cool. Like, Mewtwo just looks rad, right? Mega Mewtwo, on the other hand, well, Mega Mewtwo X is just kinda lame. Like, it's trying to be sharper, more physically powerful, looking to match its fighting type, sure, but shrinking the tail and giving it weird combat wrinkles just doesn't work for me. It looks clunky, not cool. The Mega Y form is more successful, hyper-emphasizing Mewtwo's psychic powers by shrinking the body and retaining that alien weirdness at the cost of the original's more uncannily mixed design. The Y form is definitely the better Mega, but for my money they're both less interesting and less cool than the original. I heard that you can catch Mew if you go to the truck near the SSN, but you have to have the bike ticket in your inventory and 2 Pikachus in your party and then press up, down, BA, start, select, and you have to catch it with the Master Ball, otherwise it doesn't work. Kids today don't know the kinds of rumors we used to swap about this Pokemon. Anyway, in its original form, Mew seems to be based on an embryonic fetus, which sort of points to its role as the ostensible genetic progenitor of all other Pokemon. Over time, that rather creepy design has been cutened up to be more cat-like and less disturbing, but it does retain a certain alienness, especially with those stubby little arms and the tail with a big bulb on the end. And Mew is a really solid design in that way. It's just weird and cute enough that, yeah, you can buy it as an obscenely powerful mythical psychic demigod capable of standing toe-to-toe with Mewtwo. You can buy it as a sort of Pokemon cryptid. Plus, it's cute as hell, what's not to like? And with that, I have reviewed all 151 original Pokemon plus their evolutions. If you liked it, consider tipping me on Patreon maybe, or becoming a member of the channel. Gen 2 is next.